So we are broadcasting live right now on YouTube and also here locally on Zoom. Today we're going to be talking about returning to office best strategies, which is something that is on top of everybody's mind today. And we have a great series of panelists for you today. I'm going to be acting as your host. My name is Heather and I'm the CEO and founder of Wellness. Wellness is a workplace wellness company. We have over 6,000 different health and wellness programs and classes that employees can take either over video or live over webinar. And in regards to return to work, we specifically do services around COVID testing, temperature taking, and antibody testing. Which is a good segue into today's topic. So today we have three amazing panelists. We have Kristen Colley, who is the Managing Director of Coachman Wakefield, Kristen, VP of Global Talent Experience at RGA, and Jill Katz, who is the CEO and founder of Assemble HR Consulting. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about them and their experience around return to work. And then we're going to dive in with questions. So Christine, why don't you kick it off and give us a little intro?
Sure, thanks, Heather. As you mentioned, I'm Managing Director at Coachman Wakefield, and a lot of what we've been doing as it relates to return to work is helping our clients sort of make sure they're practicing social distancing, taking the proper safety precautions, working with them to make sure that their employees feel comfortable, but also consulting them on sort of how to effectively work from home. My sort of day-to-day is working with tenants in the office area where we sort of help with transactions, acquisition of space. So with everyone being home, you know, that's been on a pause a little bit. So we've really pivoted a bit to being more consultative on how to make sure they're working effectively from home, but well prepared to return to the office when that starts.
Excellent, thank you. And Krista.
Thank you, Heather. My name is Krista Balaam, and I am the VP Executive Director of Talent and Global Operations at RGA. And my role specifically at RGA as it pertains to returning to office, I, as well as a couple other key colleagues, are pulling together information to ensure that when we first went into quarantine, we were able to successfully put our employees back or send them home. And when we're returning back into the office, what does that look like? And how do we ensure that our employees, when they do come back, are safe and we are putting them as top priority in their health and safety for them as well as their family are number one priority to us. So ensuring that process is succinct and is meeting all federal and national guidelines as it pertains to health.
Wonderful, Krista. We love your background. It looks so peaceful. And Jill, I saw we got Jill on video. Yay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, Krista and Christine. It's so good to be with you both today. Well, I think this was a perfect start and a great example of what return to work is going to be like. The way that I joined our webinar today, which is that anything can change on a dime in today's new world of work. And we're all so used to living in a world and being overly prepared. And just when we think we have everything ready, things aren't always going the way that we expect them to go. And so I've spent the past 7 months, probably like the rest of us here, logging on to Zoom every day, all day. And today when I click the button, it just didn't happen. There's no good explanation and I don't know why, but I think that's probably a perfect metaphor for what return to work is about. I'm the founder of Assemble HR. I spent 22 years inside of organizations leading the talent and people function. And now we have the great opportunity to partner with organizations of all sizes with a very clear mission of bringing people-focused leadership back to the forefront of the workplace. And so the work that we do is really partnering with leaders and organizations, not on the logistics or compliance or legality of bringing people back to the workplace, but really what the experience is going to feel like and how we can lead people through this, because we're all changed. Every single one of us will be returning to our work life as a changed being. And so that's the work that we're doing right now.
Amazing. So we're going to jump into our questions. Before we do, we're going to just send out a quick poll to just ask everyone on the call what your role type is so that we can answer your questions related to what your area of interest might be. So I just sent you out a Zoom poll if you want to answer that. I'll give you a few minutes. All right, I see the answers coming in hot and fast. All right, everybody voted here, so I'm going to share the results here. So it looks like ops, HR facilities, a lot of you here, and as well, we've got consultants, employees, and others. Unfortunately, we don't know what others are, but we'll try to address your concerns as well. We will have a Q&A at the end, so you'll be able to ask any questions you might have that we haven't addressed. So let's go ahead and get right to it. So our first question for the panelists: are companies actually considering opening their offices at all at this time, or are they fully closing down their offices and going full work from home? Are employees really moving out to the burbs and abandoning the cities? What are some of these trends that you're seeing overall? And Christine, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. So it's interesting, most sort of major changes in the economy or, events that impact sort of, particularly in New York, and the way we do business and the way we operate have a wholesale trend that comes away. But with this pandemic, we're not seeing anything definitive. It's not like we can, say that 95% of people are staying closed through the end of the year or into 2021. We're not seeing people, even opening. We're seeing some people opening offices remotely in the suburbs, but really on a short term, more of a Band-Aid situation. We're not seeing a lot of people move out of the city, although we are seeing a lot of people reside outside of the city for now. I think part of that has to do with the fact that it's summertime. A lot of what we're seeing in terms of the commercial real estate market is people taking precautions to be prepared and to be nimble. So they're not necessarily doing anything that's going to impact them long term. They're not closing offices, but they may be doing a short-term sublease of space, or, some people, there was a thought that people would be taking more space to allow for social distancing. But obviously that has huge cost implications. So a lot of people are trying to understand, okay, for the next however long until we have a vaccine, if we need to implement social distancing within the workplace, how can we identify employees that are capable and just as efficient working from home, so we can use that additional space within offices to allow for social distancing. So unfortunately, there's no real wholesale trend, but people are really analyzing and studying the options. And I think the answer today is that they're taking short-term precautions to be flexible for the future.
Excellent. And Krista, why don't we go to you next?
Sure. I don't think that people or offices are going to be shutting down altogether. I do think that both Jill in the beginning and Christine also mentioned nimble and being able to be flexible. And that's what we're seeing more of right now. Specifically at RGA, it's how are we going to be able to, when we do think it's safe enough to open up, accommodate those people who would like to come into the office because they want to continue that collaboration, maybe not on a full-time basis, but also take into account those individuals who are able to fully work remote and able to work from home, and they're quite okay with not coming into the office. So I think that there's going to really be a balance as it pertains to are people really moving to the burbs. We are seeing a decent amount of people relocating, and that's actually more so though just to make sure that we all know that school is starting back up, and people, parents, as well as caregivers need additional support. And so we're seeing that there are people who are relocating to be closer to family so they can have that support, especially with juggling going to work and working full time, as well as doing remote learning for their children.
Yeah, and that's definitely a big topic is parenting, and with schools being closed. I think there was a New York Times article that you can either have a job or be a parent, but you can't have both right now. So definitely something we'll touch on. Jill, any thoughts on this one? Oh, Jill, you are on mute.
It's clearly not my day on the technology side. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that there's going to be a lot of conversation today, on that topic. And, we have employees in every company that I think represent really a mixed bag of emotions. You have some people that are filled with anxiety right now. You have some people that are incredibly excited. As Krista just mentioned, there are some people that have been dealing with tremendous loneliness and are really excited to come back into a work environment and have the opportunity to collaborate. There are people that are really concerned. They are worried about their own health. They're worried about the health of their coworkers. There are leaders that are worried about their teams. There are people that have a real desire, quite frankly, to escape their home environment and get out of there and kind of go back to normal. And so there's this there's this anxiety, there's this excitement. But the fact is, no matter where we are coming from, everyone has dealt with something. And so there is nobody that is the same as she was or he was last year in February or January or December. We're all in some way impacted, and we've all gone through something different. And so now you've got people that are single. You've got people that are and have no dependents whatsoever. You've got some people that do have dependents and they're on their own taking care of children or elderly people or people that are infirm and need special care. You've got people that have families all along this whole entire continuum. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that as our conversation continues. But what's really important in the workforce is that leaders understand and acknowledge that all along this continuum, every group of workers will need their own special set of considerations. And so it's a different time than it was before when everyone needed to be treated the same, because now not everyone's situation is the same. And that's where this gets a little sticky and tricky.
Absolutely. And I know I'm one of those people that was going insane working from home and have returned to my office. So I know that definitely there's a population there that doesn't enjoy working from home, as well as those who are loving it. So when it comes to actually thinking around reopening the offices, when are companies starting to look at that? I know I've been hearing a lot that companies aren't looking to do this until maybe towards the end of the year or maybe early 2021. And when they're thinking of that, what are some of the strategies that they're looking at to enable that safe reopening? We'll start with Krista. I know, Krista, you've done some work within your own company around this topic.
Yes, so as far as reopening, I think that many organizations right before the summer started were probably thinking, oh, maybe around Labor Day we would start considering what maybe going back to the office looks like on a very small scale. And now I think that we've moved a lot of organizations that I've heard have moved to January now. And even as far out as 2021 summer. So I definitely think the goalpost continues to move in returning to the office. I don't think anyone has a strong date in mind. Definitely 2021 is probably the safe bet right now. But making sure when we are returning to the office, we've really started to thinking about how we're going to do that. We do have global offices, and so some of those offices have in fact started going back, and we have created playbooks for the managers of those offices to make sure that they are thinking about everything from what does your HVAC system look like, what does signage look like, what do your food and drink areas look like, what are your policies around restrooms and elevators and visitors. So there's so much to think about. Even in addition to those items, what does it look like if someone actually comes in or notifies us and says, I actually have tested positive for COVID. What does that look like for the office? Do you close the office down again for 2 weeks? When this first started, I think many people were taking the approach, we'll close it down and do a deep clean. But at this stage, I don't necessarily think that that's appropriate based on the very little information that we are learning week by week, month by month. So I definitely think it's something that no one should rush into. I also think that employers should make sure that they are listening to their employees as it pertains to what's going to make them comfortable to come back into the office, and taking all of those items into account, creating a plan that's going to emphasize everything that is being said, the listenings that are happening, and then implementing them into place to make sure that when it is safe to go back, everyone is comfortable who is walking through those doors.
Yeah, and speaking of the sort of the workplace design implications, the HVAC, and what do you do with the break room? Coachman Wakefield put out a really interesting report around this and different sort of office design strategies that you can implement. Christine, maybe you can share a little bit more about that.
Sure. So we have, obviously we're a global firm and represent clients globally. So I don't want to use the word fortunate, but we have the resources and data from, other countries and major cities that have been opening to be able to really study and analyze what's working, what's not, what are people comfortable with. We came up with a concept called the 6-foot office, which is really about, was the beginning. This was actually, I think, in May, kind of ahead of the game, but really talking about sort of, okay, the arrows you have to follow, how often do you have hand sanitizer stations, making sure all your employees have PPE, putting down sort of these pieces of paper on your workstation that you're required to change and move out every time you leave your desk so that everything's staying clean. And that was a concept we started in the Netherlands, and it's been really interesting to track that, and we've now implemented in our headquarters in New York. And we are open. We have 25%, well, we're open for 25% maximum capacity at a time. So our office is roughly 700 people, and we were able to have 25% of people in there. The interesting fact is that we're on a day-to-day only seeing about 10% of the people actually show up. So the 25% that we're kind of given the green light, fewer of them are coming into the office. Part of that may be because it's summertime and they're enjoying time with their families. But I think one big thing is that, it's terrific if we can have a safe workplace and a place where people feel comfortable coming in, because it was all voluntary. But then you add in the variables of how are you getting to the office? How are you getting lunch? How are you getting coffee? Is it really any different being in your, windowed office in Manhattan in a skyscraper than being in, your living room or a makeshift office at home? There's definitely a need for that for a certain demographic and people who want that sort of social interaction. But if it's a really limited number of people within actually coming to the office, you don't necessarily fill that gap. But going back to the Safe 6, sort of the biggest thing we looked at was making sure the building is prepared. So making sure that the building ownership is taking proper precautions. How are they handling security? How are they doing temperature testing? Are they limiting the number of people in elevators? Are you permitted to take the stairs? things like that. And then really communicating and preparing our workforce. So making sure they understand what the protocols are, making sure they understand what the decision-making process is for who can or who cannot come back to the office and why those decisions are being made, so no one feels sort of left out, quote unquote. Obviously limiting access. So our office is open, but there's no visitors. Our cleaning staff is very limited, reoccurring, as opposed to, sometimes facilities teams rotate through and you could have a different person on the floor from the building. And then really having a careful social distancing plan. So conference rooms that used to seat 20 people, no longer, we're only max 2 people in any room, including a private office. So having those plans in place and making sure we're communicating those, and the cleaning and the HVAC and the ventilation all along with that, but making sure that employees understand what it's going to be like has been interesting to track, because I think people in their heads think, let's go back to the office, but they don't realize how different it's going to be. And then a lot of them are saying, okay, we're here, but maybe I was more comfortable at home, or some of the benefits of the office just aren't there anymore because there's no pantry, there's fewer people, there's no networking events, there's really limited interaction because you don't have those sort of bump into someone in the hall situation. So it's been really interesting, but I do think wholesale people are pushing to 2021 and well into 2021, particularly with what we're seeing around the country and this conversation around a second wave. I think people are just being as precautious as they can be.
Jill, I'm sure a lot of your clients are struggling with this right now. What are you hearing from them?
I love everything that Christine just went through, because it's so comprehensive, and that is, I like to think that everyone who has joined us today through whatever avenue they've had the chance to come and listen, wrote all of it down or recorded it, because those are great examples of a company that is going over and above, which is what employees want. So what employees want is to know that their safety and well-being is the #1 priority right now. And as the economy began to dive, the big fear in the hearts and minds of employees was, what's more important to my company? Is it my company's success, or is it my health and safety? And right now, what you're starting to see is the beginning of where employees will either cleave to their companies or separate from their companies, and you'll see the long-term effect of it. Companies that have created stronger connectivity to their teams and are going out of their way, just like Christine is sharing for Coachman, to be really quite astounding about their safety precautions and thinking through every little detail, like, even if we've gone out of our way to have a procedure regarding the elevator and I'm not comfortable, is there a plan B? And beyond that, once all of those boxes are checked, there is this other component, and that component is well-being, which is, I'm going to come back to work, and I need to know that my organization has taken really good care to know that we are compliant, that everything has been taken care of, that it is physically safe. But then there's everything happening inside of me and how I feel, and whether I'm nervous, whether I'm anxious, what has transpired for me in my life that you either know or more likely don't know all the details about. And a great deal of the work I've been doing with organizations is an open forum program where we are learning that most employees absolutely have not shared, even with their closest colleagues, what they've really been through. And that's been the biggest aha of all for us. And so where there have been very big, horrible crises, like the loss of a loved one, those are things that people do generally know about. But there are so many other experiences of loss and grief that we've all gone through that are not public. And so in some of the programs we've shared with organizations, teams have an open forum, and suddenly the 5, 6, 7, 20 people that people have been working with on a day-to-day basis for months or years. People are suddenly finding out what their closest friends have gone through, and they are stunned. And when you suddenly find out that a close colleague of yours has a mother a few states away that's in a facility who they haven't been able to see for weeks, or they have a child with special needs, or they've had to move out of a home to another place because of a financial loss. And I have lists and lists, things that we wouldn't just generally share. It changes the game. And so I would add 3 things to Christine's list that go on our checklist. And that is this transparent communication. Because every day that someone shows up, there is a possibility our circumstances have changed. Just like me this morning. I showed up and my Zoom didn't work. There's no good reason. And yesterday it worked, and the day before that it worked. And so the more openness we can share with one another, everything Christine's organization is doing, she can't share it enough. There aren't enough times, there aren't enough ways that that can be reinforced to make people feel good and safe and secure. And to be continuously flexible with one another and letting ourselves know what the options are. So, oh my goodness, today your Zoom isn't working. That's okay. There's a call-in number. Here are all the things that we can do. So that communication. The next thing is to show care. We all want to show care. Krista, I loved everything she was sharing. There's so much care coming out of what you're doing with your organizations. And that level of empathy is what it's all about right now. Every person's circumstance is different. And so that need to check in and understand what happened for you and you and you. We've all been through something, but it's different. And so what I need and what you need and what this person needs may all look different. And then the last thing is to offer resources. And so beyond checking temperature and having hand sani and all of these procedures, there's more, which is first and foremost, leaders were not born with the skills to lead through a crisis like this. None of us were. And so first and foremost is leadership development has always been important, but it's never, ever been more important. And so investing in developing leaders right now to help them help the team, because the leaders have also been through a lot. And then remote teams still need support. There are ways to give people help with stress, like, minute meditation and yoga, to open dialogue forums, D&I work. There's still so much going on right now. We could do another entire session regarding what's happened simultaneously around the world of diversity and inclusion, which also isn't new, but which has made this an even harder time for so many of our colleagues, particularly our Black colleagues, who've gone through a pandemic and they've watched this entire experience unfurl. So there's so much going on for our team members right now that we need to remember that hand sani is just the beginning.
There's so much to think through. There's everything from the building to your policies and procedures to how the employees are actually feeling about returning to the office. It seems overwhelming almost. Where we've talked a little bit about checklists. Are there actually checklists? Where can somebody go to find a toolkit or some sort of framework to start building their policies and plans around?
I can just give a little Coachman commercial. We have a great website. If you go to coachwake.com, they have a ton of resources. We have a global recovery readiness task force that has studied, how we've gone back to the office across the globe, country, but also how our clients are going back to the office. So not just looking at one publicly traded mega firm, but looking at some of our clients from a diverse group of industries and client sizes. And we've aggregated a lot of that data to put together a checklist. And so I'm also happy to circulate something, Heather, if you want to send it that to everyone on the call that sort of goes through high level, here's sort of best practices. But I do think that, Jill, I agree, you have to add those 3 other boxes to check, because those are something that we're certainly missing.
Absolutely. We'll include that in, we'll put up a blog after with the recording, and we'll include a link to that checklist there as well. So before we move on to the next question, I just want to tell everybody there's a Q&A section here at the bottom of your Zoom. So if you think of any questions while we're talking that you'd like the panelists to answer, go ahead and pop them in there. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll address those questions during the Q&A part. Jill, did you look like you wanted to say something? Did I cut you off? No? All right. So speaking around employees more and how they're feeling, there's certainly a difference, as we touched upon, from different employee groups. So again, Cushman & Wakefield in your study had a really interesting insight that I enjoyed around how millennials are adapting versus Gen X. And I found it very surprising, because I would assume millennials would be adapting the best from working from home because they're very tech savvy, they've grown up on the internet. But the study actually found that that is not the case, because many millennials have very small apartments and maybe have roommates and may not have an environment that's constructive to working from home. And I believe it was the study found that Gen X is actually thriving the best here. So I'd love to talk more about these different employee populations and how it's affecting them differently. Even within that, there's the question around employees that can commute in a car versus having to take public transportation to work, and how that impacts how they're feeling. So Krista, why don't we start with you?
Yes, so as it pertains to people who are, I think that we're often seeing individuals who live in city environments, especially around the transportation, is a huge component. I know even myself personally, I haven't traveled on the subway since March, and I don't foresee myself doing that anytime in the near future. And that's just because of my safety, my safety comfort. And so, especially some of our offices that do highly use public transportation to get into the office, I think that taking that into consideration is going to definitely be a piece of the large puzzle that we're putting together, and how to make sure that when we do technically open the office back up, we are meeting those needs. And what does that even look like? Is it looking like having a flexible schedule, back to flexibility, like Jill said, being flexible, and they're coming in a little bit later in order to make sure that they aren't on the subway or the bus with people at a high travel period, and then going home later in the day when that, or even leaving early when the travel is less and there's less people on public transportation. So thinking about that. Also, as it pertains to people who we're seeing having enormous challenges, is back to our working parents and our working caregivers. Those are the individuals who are extremely struggling, and it's an understatement how much they are trying to cope with and juggle so many different things at one time, and really trying to understand how, as an organization, we can help them through this. And I do think that it's an enormous feat to even try and problem solve, but we recently did a future of working survey to get more insights from all of our employees throughout all of our offices, but especially honing in on working parents and caregivers, to get a better understanding of what exactly are their needs. And once we get a true understanding of what those needs are, what are we able to do in order to help facilitate some changes within their day-to-day work. Because many of them, they're going to be doing this until the end of the school year again, and trying to do a full-time job, and that anxiety also that Jill, you spoke about as it pertains to, am I still going to have a job if I'm not able to do the work that's necessary? Is that going to ding me on my performance evaluation? Am I going to be put on some type of list? And all those anxieties are real to many individuals. And how do we make sure that those individuals know that that is not the case, and we're here to support them throughout this time?
Absolutely. Jill, let's go to you.
I'd like to announce that I properly unmuted myself this time, and I'm really excited.
Great job.
Making progress. Kristen nailed it. I want to say yes, yes, yes. So Krista, thank you. And one of the questions I want to ask all of us before I answer the question is, in the past 2 weeks, with many of the clients that I've been working with, and I would say about 75% of the people I'm referring to are New York City-based organizations, all of whom have this brilliant secret idea. So I'm going to let the cat out of the bag of having people commute off hours. And so one of the things that I'm starting to wonder about, right, is, you know, we're all New Yorkers are used to this rush that happens usually between, would you say, like 7:30 and 8:30, and then again between probably 5:30 and 6:30. But everyone has this secret sauce now that we're going to be rushing off hours. So I've now decided that if you try to get in or out of New York City between 7 and 11 a.m., or if you try to get out of New York between 4 and 8 p.m., you're busted. So I don't know how it's going to work, but I just think that's going to be really, really interesting. And that's a whole nother conversation. But, you know, I think all three of us at some point have talked about this, you know, even if the space is safe and locked down, how you get there, unless you have your own spaceship, is going to be another conversation. But Krista, I love everything you said, and I think you dipped your toe into so many of the topics that we're dealing with also with these different groups of people. So working parents are getting the most press right now around the struggles that working parents are dealing with. And working parents in many cases are at the mercy of the school districts, which are many cases at the mercy of their state governments, which are at the mercy of, and I'm not even going to go there. And you wake up on any given day and that changes. And so I can say in my own district, our school situation has changed 3 times, and our school year hasn't even begun. So how can you change something that isn't even happening? And the answer is you can do anything you want. And so, of course, as a worker who wants nothing other than to appear loyal and committed and putting your best foot forward, how do you manage being in this struggle when you don't have the ability to make decisions for yourself? You're at the mercy of other decisions that aren't even stable, and your leadership is asking you to commit to things that aren't unreasonable at work, and you can't answer, or you answer and then something changes on the other end, and now you have to change your answer at work. It doesn't feel good. And so what's unfortunate is that working parents can be put in an adverse situation that isn't their fault. And so Krista mentioned concern about performance reviews and, quite frankly, advancement and future advancement. And this will have, unfortunately, and I'll say it out loud, likely an uneven negative impact on women, because unfortunately, more often the caregiver is a female. And so I do think that we are looking at a potential workplace inequity issue and gender pay gap topic that's going to get wider and louder, which is unfortunate. And for caregiving dads, caregiving men, it's even harder because the expectation of men in the workplace and men that are taking care of children to put those children first and make those decisions is unusual and unexpected. Now, the other side of the coin, which is interesting, is that there is this group of people that are not caregivers of children. And there is an unfair expectation being put on these team members as well. And these team members are feeling, wait, hang on a moment, because I don't care full-time or part-time for a child, it isn't fair that more or different expectations should be put on me. And so many of those team members are also feeling the brunt of not being parents or caregivers. And it is really unfair or unreasonable for organizations to make assumptions about those team members, because again, we don't know their circumstance. We don't know what else is happening for those members of our teams behind the scenes. We don't know if they have elderly parents that they're taking care of or siblings. We don't know if they are, I worked with one person who doesn't have children, but that person's sister is an ER nurse, and she is the second caregiver to that ER nurse's 2 children. And so while she is not legally the parent, that woman, a single person, 30 years or younger, is absolutely taking care of 2 children, ages 5 and below, 6 days a week. Well, not fair for her to be seen by her organization as not bearing the same stress as a parent. And so again, going back to organizations needing to be really individualized and taking the time to understand what circumstance every person is in, and not making generalizations at all, because this is not a one-size-fits-all moment at all.
Thank you, Jill. And going back to your transportation hypothesis, I have been taking the PATH train from New Jersey to New York every weekday for several months now. And when I started, you would have a car all to yourself, and now the ridership has significantly gone up. So I think you're spot on. I'm seeing it every day, more and more people getting on that public transportation. So time will prove you right on that one, I think.
I just really want to quickly add it to the transportation question, because I think it is a huge dilemma for people. And going back to, you have to understand what people feel comfortable with, and you can't just expect that people are going to want to get on a subway. Some may feel okay getting on public transportation, others may not. And the reality of it is, unfortunately, there's a cost burden if you're not taking public transportation. And one big question we've been struggling with, or our clients have really been struggling with, is who bears that cost burden? Is it the, younger generation that lives downtown that used to take the subway in and now doesn't feel comfortable on the subway and they have to take an Uber every day? That's not, sustainable. Is it then the company says, okay, we're going to coordinate Ubers for our employees coming in? That's a huge cost implication on the company. We've had groups look at, do we have a shuttle for Manhattan, almost like a school bus that goes to different areas and brings everyone in via shuttle, because that's a little less expensive than individual Ubers. We've had people say, if you're coming from the suburbs, you have to get on this car. Anyone who goes on, the Metro North Hudson line, I guess, you're getting on the 3rd car down, and we're going to try to make that just our employees. Well, that's never going to work, because people miss trains and people just, stuff happens. And frankly, I never know which one's the front or the back of the train. So I wouldn't be able to follow that protocol, but it is a huge question, I think. And I think one of the most unanswered questions that we're dealing with, particularly because you just don't know what people's comfort levels are. And then the cost impact is huge. And I think a lot of companies are kind of, if people are going back to work, are saying to their employees, figure it out. And that's not fair, because you may be limited in, your ability to pay for an Uber or a taxi or even a city bike. And you may also then have someone at home where you're taking care of who's elderly or high risk. And then it's sort of the dilemma of, do I, stay within my means, or do I take care of this person? I think it's challenging for people to be having to answer that question and deal with that decision. So that's something I think will be a huge concern and a big topic going forward as people do start to go back to the office.
Yeah, and I think there's similar cost questions that arise from work from home. Are you going to provide employees with budget to set up their workstations? We're working with a client that's engaging us to do work from home ergonomic assessments to get their employees set up. And one of those open questions is, should the assessor make tool recommendations? You need a monitor riser, you need a wrist pad. Because if so, then does the company need to provide those things and bear that additional cost? So I think there's a lot of hidden costs that have now come up and become a question. So we have about 12 minutes left. I'm going to send out one more poll to ask everybody what your top concerns about right now around reopening your office, and then we'll give the panelists a chance to address the top concern, and then we will move on to our Q&A after that. I'll just give a minute for the votes to come in here. All right, so I'm going to share the results. So it looks like by far and away the winner here is employee morale. So panelists, we've touched on this a little bit. Let's talk about what are some of the actionable steps that employers can take to try to improve employee morale around not just reopening the office, but around the entire situation that we all find ourselves in today.
So I can jump in on that. This is what we've really been focusing on. I think a lot of the work that we've talked about regarding safety, security, compliance is the price of entry. I think it is just an expectation of employees that if I'm going to come back into the building, the workspace, you better make sure it is safe and sound and compliant, and all of the rules and mandates are followed. And if we're lucky, you will have gone as far as or even further than Christine and company. That's the bar. But that's just my basic expectation. And I think lots of companies are hoping that that's all they have to do. And so I'm actually not surprised to see that morale is our biggest concern, because that's the piece that's intangible. You can't put morale in bottles on people's desks and then walk away from it and consider it done. And that's the part that really is special and individualized, and it can change. And it isn't something that's over, and it isn't something that gets solved. It's something that is amoebic and organic and scary. And quite frankly, we don't have control over it. And quite frankly, we all know every day. I found out yesterday that a person I had spent a great deal of time with tested positive. And that probably has happened to many of us here. And I went right through the cycle again. And that's going to happen to us all over. And does it impact my morale? Does it impact how I felt about being with that person? Yes. That's going to be our lives for quite some time. And so what can we do about it? And so that's how I've spent a lot of my time and what I've been on the speaking circuit about. And the answer is, there's a couple things. Yeah. Do the Zoom happy hours work? They work for some people. And does sharing our baby pictures work? It works for some people. And do social distance gatherings with our chairs 6 feet apart work? Yes, they work for some people. But the answer is that everything works for some people. And that's what's most important. There is nothing that works for everyone. And so the most effective leaders are the leaders that will believe that and lean into it. Leaders who want a one-size-fits-all, like these are our rules and we're going to apply them to our team of 5, 50, 500, or 50,000 won't win. And that's why morale is scary and heavy, because everyone needs something different. So some people are going to feel really gypped that you didn't ask for their baby picture because they want to show you. And some people are going to be appalled when you ask them to share their baby picture and they don't want to share it and they don't think that's fun. And the only way you're going to know is to ask. And so my recommend is that the best way to lean into morale is to coach and train your leaders. To coach and train leaders on empathy and communication so that leaders can return, whether it's remotely or in person, and be really effective at figuring out what their people need. And that's not easy, but it's like being a doctor. Things need to be diagnosed right now, and we need to teach our leaders how to diagnose.
I think that was a wonderful answer to leave that on. We do have a few questions, so let's go ahead and get to that Q&A so we can get those answered. We have Joe, who's our Q&A maestro, on the call. So Joe, I'm going to unmute you. Could you share with us the first question for the panelists?
All right, just want to confirm first that you can hear me.
We can.
Excellent. Now, I am unable to see the questions, so you may have to check a box.
All right, well, you know what? I can see the question, so I will sub in as Q&A maestro.
Nice talking to you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for joining, Joe. Another little Zoom glitch in this new work from home paradigm. So our first question, and I think this is probably a good question for Krista to take. What are your thoughts on getting a waiver of liability signed by each employee prior to opening your office back up? Any formal way to address the company's liabilities as we consider reopening slowly?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I actually don't think that we have talked about signing a waiver of liability. And my gut tells me that we probably aren't going to get anybody to sign a waiver of liability. We weren't getting people to sign waiver of liabilities when this first hit, and we were trying to notify people that when there was suspicion that they may have COVID or people in their family. And I don't see us doing that moving forward. We don't get people to sign waivers of liability if they get the flu or any cold or any other contagious, cough or virus during the year. So I don't see why we would treat this any differently. I do think that it goes back to, though, what is our communication strategy around what's going to happen if we are notified that someone has been infected or someone very close to them has been infected, and making sure that there's clear guidance around what the organization is going to do in those instances and what steps and measures we're going to take to make sure that people are safe. And what does that timing look like, I think, is probably more important than making people sign waivers.
Excellent. Jill, Christine, anything to add on that one? Nope.
Not really. I mean, we have had some clients talk about the waiver of liability concept, but I think, Krista, to your point, if we don't ask anyone to do that for the flu, we don't, do that in any other situation. So it seems challenging. But we do have, at least, it's not a waiver of liability. It's more an informational sort of survey where when you come into the office, you fill out a form basically, and it's done through an app that says you don't have a temperature and you took your temperature before coming in, and have you been in close contact, and it's basically self-certifying that to the best of your knowledge you're not positive with COVID and that you feel fit to be in the office. So documenting that, and then and that's actually a requirement right now for all employees coming into our office. So you have to fill out that form every time you actually leave. So if I were to go out to get lunch, I would have to fill it out again before re-entering the office. And I think it's just a good way for our firm, the operations team to sort of manage accountability amongst the employees. And I also think it makes people coming into the office feel more safe.
So our next question is, what are some ways you're seeing companies foster office culture and engagement during this time? And I can take a first crack at this one. We are getting a lot of clients coming to us for this very reason. So how do you replace the things that you used to do? You used to maybe do in-office chair massages, or you maybe had an on-site gym. Maybe you were doing happy hours, team building events. And how do you now do all of this virtually and still foster that same sense of community and well-being, emotional well-being, physical well-being? And so that's a lot of what we do, is a lot of these virtual type events, everything from virtual knitting to on-demand video content around health and wellness programming. Our most popular content right now is the category of coping with stress and anxiety, as you might imagine. But I think to Jill's point, there is no one size fits all solution. Some people will really engage with programs like that and other people won't. And it's going to be around finding a variety of initiatives and options that you can bring in and test with your employees. So our very last question today is, how do you keep the morale of your staff who need to be in the office to do their job, like, for example, security guards, while other employees have the opportunity to decide to work from home or to come into the office? And I'll open that up to whoever wants to jump in on this one.
I can jump in on that if you like. I would turn the question around and I would say, how would you keep that person's morale up anyway? Because that person is a person. And what is interesting to me is that many of the questions that have now come to the forefront are topics that leaders needed to be focusing on, and many leaders were working on pre-pandemic. And so when we say things like, how do I keep a security guard or a warehouse worker or a parking attendant or someone who needs to be where they are engaged, I would say, what would matter to that person and what would keep that person engaged pre-pandemic? And then I would go through all the same steps. And the answer to how do I keep a person engaged, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, is finding out what matters to that person. And that's the real trick. And one of our biggest mistakes as leaders is to believe that what matters the most to me is going to matter to you. So if I always wanted a raise, I'm more likely to think that giving my security guard a raise is going to solve it for that person, and that maybe she wants a raise. And if I was a person that always wanted a title promotion, I might think that my warehouse worker wants a title promotion and that he'll be happy with it, but that's not the case. The best way to keep a person engaged is to check in with that person, invest time one-on-one with that person, because that moment is the first moment of engagement. Letting that person know you see him, you recognize her and appreciate what she's doing, especially now, and learn about what's happening in that person's world and life, you'll know how to engage that person. You'll find out what matters most. The clients I work with, we have a list of over 170 motivators that go way beyond money and promotion, that really make a difference and matter in people's lives. And that's how you engage your team.
Excellent advice, Jill. We are at time. You will get an email afterwards. It's going to have a link to the recording of this, as well as some key takeaways. We'll include Coachman Wakefield's checklist in there and some contact information so that you can follow up with any other questions. Thank you to our panelists for your time and your sage wisdom today. We appreciate it.